Thank you, Becky. Thank you all for coming today. This is a wonderful occasion, the opening of our exhibit for the Channel Champ, and we have several dignitaries who will speak to you today, and I hope it'll be a fun afternoon for you all. It is a momentous occasion, highly unusual, mostly because for once, I'm not the oldest balloonist in the room. There are a few here that outdate me. Anyhow, the gentleman that I would like to introduce first is Mr. Orvin Olivier. Orv is the chairman of the BFA Awards Committee, and Orv has the pleasure of introducing Mr. Yost. Orv?
You know, as I look around this museum and you see a lot of interesting things here, and you realize a lot of hard work goes into this, and the thing I really appreciate the most about it is it's all done by volunteers, like Becky and Gary and Mark and the others. So I think you all deserve a round of applause as well. I want to expound on something that Becky said that maybe carry it a little bit further. She was talking about this being a historical piece of equipment. For your information, this is the most historical surviving hot air balloon artifact in the world, period. There is nothing more historical surviving an artifact than this piece. And you see the board there, and that board really represents probably the first piece of equipment that was developed for the modern hot air balloon that might be called a basket or a gondola. This was the first generation after Ed sitting on this chair, and I might add, occasionally jumping off when he came in for landings, was this board. And so this is, you have a wonderful, wonderful artifact there. I hope you really appreciate it. Before I introduce Ed, I'm going to just tell a little story about how this all came about, even getting this system put back together, because I think it's pretty interesting. What happened is back in the early 60s, there really was two hot air balloon envelopes, both white, both same size. One was an engineering balloon, and one was the Channel Champ envelope. And after the 60s went by, you know, these balloons went out of sight, and they were kind of forgotten about, really. We kind of knew there was one around. Sioux Falls, a guy named Al Thomas had it, and he always said that he had the Channel Champ balloon, but I was never really sure if it was or not, because there was actually two envelopes. I thought maybe he had the other one. I couldn't imagine why he would have this, because he wasn't a balloonist, but he did work at Raven in those days. Al died. I got a call from his estate, and they said that they had this old hot air balloon envelope. They didn't know much about it, thought maybe it had a little historical value. So we said, well, let's take it out and look at it. Ed's coming to Sioux Falls here in a few days. Let's take it, and we'll take it to the park and put some cold air into it and see what we got. So we asked Ed to come over and look at it, along with Russ Pohl and Jim Winker. And we took the thing out, and to everybody's amazement, it was the Channel Champ. And not only was it the Channel Champ, it was actually in remarkably good condition. We were shocked, and after Ed saw this balloon and saw the condition it was in, he started wondering if we could put the system back together. So he asked me if I would consider contacting the Forbes family, and he told me how to get a hold of them, and to see if I could get the lower end back, because the lower end had been in Malcolm Forbes Museum in France for a long, long time. So I started making these calls. It took a while to get through to the right people and stuff, Tim Forbes particularly. But finally I did get him to return a call, and told him what we were up to, and he was very gracious about it and said that he would, in fact, return it. It took a while. It took a number of months, but all of a sudden one day this great big box arrives, and in it was the board. And I had never seen it before, and I was really amazed at what I was looking at and couldn't really quite figure it all out. But we went to work with Ed and started to restore it. The envelope needed some work, and Aerostar did that. And the lower end, was in pretty good shape, but it was missing a few pieces. And we went to find the original pieces, through aircraft parts, which wasn't too easy anymore, but we found them. Ed, from memory, made some of the parts, at home, that were identical to the original. So I said before, I'm just amazed how sharp Ed's memory was of that balloon and those parts. It must seem like just very recently that he was flying it. But Ed supplied a number of the parts, and we put the whole system back together, and we inflated it in Sioux Falls and did a little tether work with it, and we inflated it in Albuquerque and drew a huge crowd, and now cheers. So, I'm going to introduce Ed, which I can't imagine why he needs to be introduced. But before I do that, there's two other people I think that deserve to be introduced as well. And the first one I'm going to introduce is Russ Pohl. So, Russ, why don't you at least stand up and be recognized? Russ was not one of the founders of Raven, but he was there shortly thereafter. And he was at Raven for a long time. He was a senior scientist of Raven Industries and was also involved with the hot air balloon development, and was also part of the team that went to England along with Ed and Don Picard to to put the system across the English Channel. So Russ was, if I have you, any of you on private, I'll be glad to show you a couple pictures of Ed, or Russ, because you'll be hard time to recognize him. His hair was very, very dark. The other person I'd like to introduce is Jim Winker. And Jim also would have been on the development team of the hot air balloon with Russ and Ed, although I think they will both acknowledge Ed deserves the vast majority of all the credit going to this thing. But they were all part of the team too. And Jim was a senior vice president of Raven Industries for many, many years, retiring, how many years ago, Jim? 15 years ago? That long, huh? Okay. 15 years ago. But Jim was in charge of the Applied Technology Division, and that's the division that made the hot air balloons, the high-altitude scientific balloons, and others. And so Jim is another scientist of Raven Industries. So that brings us to Ed Yost. And Ed, I assume you're going to get up and come up here. Ed, I assume you're going to get up and come up here. As Ed comes up, as you all know, Ed is considered the father of the hot air balloon, and that is a very definite, correct statement. He deserves probably also credit for being a person that restarted gas ballooning in the United States. There was a little bit of it being done, but Ed developed, a modern gas balloon and marketed it, and that's really probably what really got gas ballooning going in the United States again. And Ed deserves a whole lot more credit for a lot of other things. World record, or not world record attempts, but the attempt to cross the Atlantic Ocean, both his unsuccessful but nearly successful attempt and the ones that made it were his balloons. And you can just go on and on and on. And I'm not going to go on and on, but Ed is also the first winner of the National Balloon Museum BFA Hall of Fame. So with that, Ed Yost.
Well, it's going to be unusual because I have no canned speeches, and everyone's different. And after I'm through, I don't know what the hell I said either. So later on, I'm going to ask for questions, and hopefully later on we can get a blackboard and a piece of chalk, because I have to do that, like all good school teachers. And I was born on an Iowa farm in 1919 on the last day of June, and World War II came along. I enlisted, and I'd already been over a year to Boeing School of Aeronautics, Bill Boeing. United Airlines at that time used to be Boeing Air Transport. And the Sherman Antitrust Law broke this all up, and the Boeing factory moved to Seattle, and United Airlines, actually at that time based in Oakland, California, and Pratt & Whitney Aircraft and Hamilton Propellers they were back east in Connecticut. So actually, the Sherman antitrust laws broke them up, but they all they all had the same board members. They all had the same amount of stock and the whole thing. But when I went to in 1939 in September, I went to Oakland, California, and signed up for a 12-month course in airline operation, and I got aircraft mechanics, an aircraft engine mechanic certificate, and a commercial pilot's license, single and multi-engine land, instrument rating, and all this good stuff. So I'm not a newcomer to this business, but I do tell a few lies once in a while. I do want to point out, I was born on a farm, and when World War II broke out, I enlisted, and I was in Alaska, actually. I spent 6 years up there, and I went over to Elmendorf Field and enlisted, and the guy said, "Do you have a birth certificate?" And I said, "Sure," and I handed it to him, and I have a copy with me, if you don't believe this thing. But anyway, the birth certificate, there was no doctor on it. And the guy, the enlistment man, said, "Well, what hospital are you born in?" I said, "I wasn't born in a hospital." And he says, "What town?" I said, "No town, 7 miles from town." And he said, "Well, who delivered the baby?" And I said, "My grandmother. She lived across the road. She had 7 children in a row, you know." And he just kept going, and he said, "Who's this guy up here that signed this thing, the clerk of courts?" And it was Hugh Mosier. And I said, "That's my Uncle Hugh. My dad's oldest sister married the clerk of court." So his comment was, "You damn farmers." But anyway, being this is Armed Forces Day, I did bring something. And this is my dog tag, and this is my pilot's picture during World War II. That's only 40-some years ago. But anyway, let's start off with a question. Who has a question? Let's start. I don't know where this is going to lead to, but we'll get some good answers coming here pretty quick. Nobody have a question? Go ahead.
The board for the channel.
Yes.
You describe that as being something off of a farm?
That's absolutely proved. I was born in 1919 on a farm, and you know, those days there's no electricity, there was no telephone, there's no cars, automobiles. We had a team of horses and a buggy and a wagon. So farms at that time were just being cleared a little bit, and you know, when they had to plow and cultivate and so forth, most of the equipment is made by McCormick Dewing and also John Deere, but they had a shear pin, and it was made of a piece of oak. And when you hit a rock, that thing broke off. So during lunch hour at noon, you spent all the time whittling out new shear pins. But anyway, whenever you were not busy, they had what they called a stone boat. And you hook a team of horses on this thing and go around the field where all the rocks are and roll them up on it, and you go around the fences. It's called a stone boat. And the center of gravity on a stone boat is very low. I mean, it's not top heavy, that's for damn sure, but the 2 30-gallon tanks gave me over a 6-hour fuel supply flying across the English Channel. So I figured, if you look at the thing, you'll see when we come into land with that thing, you unhook the downwind ropes, and it just drags like a sled. So it can't flip over. That's the main thing, because when you're going from one country to the other, you don't have the slightest idea of the terrain and so forth where you're going to land, and also you don't know the wind direction. And that particular flight was, I don't know how to start some of this stuff, but that flight was done for a purpose, and it was not it's not done for publicity or anything like this. It was a military operation, kind of. And the kind of comes when I talked to Washington, and the man who I talked to said, "How would you like to go over?" It turns out that the General Brown, who is in charge of the Air National Guard, is also a member of another organization in Washington that I'm very familiar with. But he said, "What would you like to go overseas on?" I told him what I wanted to do. And he said, "A troop transport?" And I said, "No, I don't like troop transport." And he said, "How about a tanker, CK-97, which is an Air Force tanker, and I don't know how many hours they can stay in the air." but Rust Bowl was on. And anyway, what the deal we finally made is we left and went over. And how many hours did you get over there? I don't know, about 20. Anyway, we landed at Mildenhall, and when you do some crazy things like this, you have to stay away from all the book learning and rules, and we're pretty good at that. So we landed at Mildenhall, which is a U.S. base over there. It's a military transport base, and it's north of London quite a ways, 90 miles, you think, something like that. Anyway, you landed there, but they stopped down at the end of the runway and kicked us out, and they tacked it into operations, and we kind of walked in. It was a Sunday morning, wasn't it? And they unloaded us, and we caught a ride into London, and we had many things to do before you get there. When you go into a strange country, it's bad enough here. We have a CAA in the old days, and the FAA moved in, and they don't understand balloons because we didn't have any at that time, and everything in their vocabulary was 2 letters that said no. And the English was just as bad. And I finally found the Department of Transport in England, and I went over to London to their office, and the guy says, "You want to fly across the English Channel?" My God, he said, "We got a lot of airplanes flying across there at Dover," and he said, "You don't interfere, and that's only 30 miles across." And I said, "We don't want to do that. I want to go down the coast and make a hell of a long run and show you what we can do with this thing." And he said, "You do?" And I said, "Sure." So anyway, he said, "Where do you want to go?" And I said, "I'll pick out a launch site." And I did, way down the coast towards, and it was a town of Rye, and it's built pretty much on the La Manche. That's the English Channel. That's the way the French call it. But it's a town that was built back in 1400s. And while we were there, it was the hotel was the St. George. It was built in 1400s. And while we were there, the French came over and apologized for burning their hotel down many years before. Big deal. So anyway, we picked out the launch site, and your problems really just started out this time because all their fittings and pipe fittings, nothing worked. Didn't fit. Everything is metric, and pipe fittings, we modified everything, and we finally got that straightened out. And another thing is they did not have propane. Everything was color gas, and that's butane. They don't have the cold temperatures we have, so butane works very nice over there. However, in a balloon burner, it burns fire engine red, about like that pig or whatever it is up there. And, this gets very complicated and so forth. So we decided we'd continue, and I finally got a clearance. And I had Dr. Frisbee, she was on Eisenhower's staff, as a matter of fact. She was a meteorologist, and she was forecasting during the war for the invasion at Normandy. So she started working for our trajectory. This time of the year, usually it's perfect, but the time we were there, every day it was blowing the wrong direction. And that CK-97, what did we have, 7 days? And they were going to pick us up at Orly in Paris, and if we weren't there, that's before credit cards, and I don't know how we'd got home. So anyway, Dr. Frisbee kept apologizing for the weather, and the day before that airplane, the tanker, was supposed to be in Orly in Paris, I said, "We're going to fly today, and I don't give a damn where we go. I'm going to keep climbing that damn thing till I find a wind that will carry us across the channel." And, that was really something. If you look at the book, you'll see all the pictures. But I didn't even know the damn burner would work at very high altitude. We'd never had one over 2,000 or 3,000 feet. I had to go over 13,500 feet with that damn thing. And I finally got one that was just kind of cockeyed, but the winds down the ground were about 35, 40 miles an hour, blowing right towards the North Sea. So we finally worked our way in, I don't know, I would say 7, 8 miles from the coast. And I said, now we're going to have a wild ride going down. And I terminated velocity. The barometer was on 1,000 feet a minute coming down. And I had to, and otherwise I'd been out over the North Sea, and I don't swim very well, especially in cold water. But anyway, we got down low, and the wind's down there about 35 miles an hour going just like mad. And if you look in that picture, you'll see a picture of the power poles, and they're concrete. And I said, well, we got poles, I got to climb over them. And I climbed up and we went over the wires, but there weren't any wires on them yet. There was brand new poles. You know, these are the things you encounter, and you don't know it's going to happen. But then I picked out a nice marshy-looking field, and very flat, and it was all wet and grass and stuff. And I came in and greased it onto the thing, but my partner ejected himself and went overboard. But if you look at I have some pictures. I had to ride in the mud. I hung onto this damn thing while the balloon deflated. And I was in mud from one end to the other. That's what caused my nose to be crooked. So. But anyway, it gets better, kind of. The French have a magazine that took all these pictures. I don't know where to go from here. After we folded this thing up in this little small town, very close to, I think we ended up, I would say less than maybe an eighth of a mile from the ocean. It was very close. And there were two things. They offered a 1,000-kilometer vacation trip, did they? To the first girl that shook my hands or something like that. And the girl came up, she was only about 14, but she took off and came back dressed up too. But 14 is beyond my limit. I go, I used to say two to toothless, but I don't do that anymore. So, anyway, but the mail carrier came and we carried 200 envelopes, and he took charge of those. And the French people came, and Charles Dolphus, who is probably, he's dead now. They called him the bent twig, so then I'll be that pretty soon. But I'm going to tell you a story that's true, and she will verify what I'm saying. Charles Dolphus, way back in early ballooning days, had two tattoos on his body. One is a Chalier, and the other is, what's the other one? The Montgolfier, the hot air bullet. So, anyway, the police were there, and they rounded us all up, and they kept us in a police car. They took us down to the police station and went through all our papers over and over and over and over. We just sat there, couldn't understand what they were talking about anyway. And I don't know, about, I would say 45 minutes, the phone rang, and they said, get in the car, and we drove down to this village, and this city hall. The burgomaster was standing in tails on the steps, and they were long steps made out of granite. It was a beautiful, beautiful building. And he was in tails, and he met us, came down the steps, and it turns out that he was a balloonist in World War I. It's amazing, and he got shot down twice. They bailed out of the barrage balloons, had hydrogen in, they'd hit them with an incendiary, and they'd catch on fire, and they'd jump out with a parachute. I don't do that. My mother didn't raise any foolish children. But anyway, we went up the steps and into their chambers, and they had one room all set up, a pig bed, with champagne and cookies and little cakes and stuff, and you just can't believe how much it accomplished in just a little short time, less than about an hour after we landed. And we stayed there, I don't know, 2 or 3, wasn't that, maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours, something. And across the street, they said, well, we're going across the street. And we went across the street. And they had, how many people in that room? They had a banquet set up. This is a fact. And Charles Dolphus was there, and it was a big celebration. They were eating crickets that were chocolate-coated and all this crazy stuff, And that's not in my menu, but... Well, we were all talking, and everybody was quite excited about this time, and Charles Dolphus says, now was the occasion to see the tattoos. But years before this, after World War II, the Austrians, the government sent a representative over to interview him, take pictures of that, and write an article in the Austrian travel magazine or something, I don't know. And he told them to get lost. That's an insult, you know. But anyway, we got there for the prime unveiling, and Russ and I and J.R. Smith and I guess Picard, we walked into the restroom, and it's quite long, reached from here almost to that wall back there. But it's a long, narrow thing, and it's kind of co-ed. Huh? That's exactly right. There was a woman combing her hair up the mirror. I don't know. That man going to the bathroom reminded me there was a one-man band in there, but Dolphus dropped his pants, and lo and behold, there they were. But they're kind of faded and wrinkled, you know. But they were about that high, really. They really were. And this was, but it was a very solemn occasion. There was no laughter. There wasn't. I mean, this really was serious, wasn't it, Dick? It was. Pardon? Anyway, we went back, and, well, it got wilder. Russ was in charge, I think, of handling the balloon and all that kind of stuff. And anyway, they had us, two Frenchmen in some goddamn race car, I don't know what it was. But there were no Autobahns at that time, and they had us scheduled to go on Radio Luxembourg at, 9 o'clock that night or something like that. So they put us in this damn car, and they took off for Paris. I never so scared in my life. There were chickens flying, like a movie. That's oh, God almighty. These people are nuts anyway, but we made it. And I don't know, we all got together, and finally, and we did get on the damn airplane. How did you come? They lost an engine on the damn airplane. That's tough duty, too. Well, you want to know any more about that trip, I'll tell you. But it's fun to get in trouble with this country. But I guess a guy should keep his mouth shut. But, you want to ask any more questions? Go ahead.
As it's been said that this flight was the flight that really introduced ballooning to England and France. What was the reaction of the Brits and the French?
Well, I'll tell you what. Usually in Europe they hate Americans and they don't want Americans to win anything, but it was not that at all. You know, the only reason Picard got to go on this thing, they just hired him to sell his sport balloons, and J.R. Smith said, we're never going to get any world publicity unless there's a Picard on board. Well, that was a goddamn lie, too. But anyway, we made the front page of every place in the world. I've got them from Japan, China, you name it. Every country had the next day all about this flight. And the day we did this, 7 Germans got killed deflating a damn hydrogen balloon. Same day. So I would say we were really received very, very wonderful. And Anthony Smith, I don't know if you read about him or not. He's a very good writer. He wrote a book, Jambo, years ago in 1962, and he wanted to do this. He's I don't know how to describe him. He's kind of like me. He's just stubborn as hell, and once he makes up his mind what he's going to do, he does it, and he wants to fly from Zanzibar into Kenya and the Gorgor crater and all this stuff, and take pictures of the animals and all this stuff. And he went to Holland, and the Bosmans taught him to fly, and they sold him a balloon. And he rounded up all the hydrogen bottles in the world, and they shipped all this stuff over to Africa. And he did it, and it's a book. His name is Jambo. You'll love it. The book in Europe is called Two Hands Over. That's Ballast, but it's the same book. And it is a wonderful thing. He is being my host for going over there on the 6th and staying a week with the BBAC. And he's been a friend for all these years. He's come over here a couple times. And he's a very tall man. In fact, he wears his belt about where I wear my necktie. Any more questions? Well, before we did the English Channel bit, we took that balloon up to Cardington, and Cardington is, well, God, you got to go back to the 1930s when all the Germans had all the dirigibles in the world, and the English decided they were going to build up competition. So they built 2 hangars out of wood, huge thing, God, they're big. And if you notice in that book, the one that she just put together, I think the first picture in there, I took our balloon and we fired it up inside the hangar, and I picked up 5 people with that little 60-footer, we have 6, and they were amazed at this thing, and that's how they got exposed, really, to the hot air balloon, plus the flight that we did sooner. But, you know, we're not ashamed of the stuff we do, kind of. We don't tell anybody, but... Yeah, you got any questions about what you're flying and all that stuff? I know you're all experts, but... Yep.
Okay, you mentioned you're going over to England.
Yep.
Why don't you tell them about the reason for your trip to England?
Because I got a free ticket. Well, Lipton is a magic word. Lipton tea is, if you look back and historically, Mr. Lipton was actually raised in Scotland, but his parents were actually Irish, because Irish don't know a hell of a lot about anything, because I'm part Irish. So. But anyway, he came to the States, I think when he was about, 15 or something like that. He went to Chicago. He learned all kinds of trade secrets and, packing plants and all stuff. And he finally went back to Europe, and somehow or other, he got into yachting, and he built 3 huge trophies, and they're about this high. We saw the Lipton trophy for balloons when we were up at Cardington putting on our demonstration. Rush was there, and it's huge. Anyway, that trophy was built in the 1800s, and it's only been given out or awarded 3 times. First time in 1908. What are the other 2? There was one in 2000. Well, the French got it for winning the Gordon Bennett race 3 times in a row, and the other one was Picard and Jones. Yeah, they flew around the world. So this is going to be number 4. I'm going to get it. I don't know what for. You know. It doesn't matter anyway. Yeah, they don't let you keep it. You get to hold it for a few hours and they put it back in the office. But they have lots of traveling to do, and Becky gave me some books to get signed, and I gave them back to her today, because I'm going to be going all over the country of England and with baggage on buses and on trains and stuff, and I just can't handle any more weight. Well, what else you want to know?
This is a little off subject from Channel Champ, but a question I've never had the chance to ask you. You live not far from Albuquerque.
Pardon?
I say you live not far from Albuquerque, and you started this balloon thing as a military project. When you go to Fiesta at Albuquerque and you see 700 and something hot air balloons in the air, did you ever have fathomed that was going to come out?
I think it stinks. My work is I'd say my work is 95% military. And we develop things for special purposes for NASA too. And, well, let me tell you, let's go back to the Channel Champ. That wasn't the only flight that made. That balloon also, in February 1964, where they'd only been back a few months, and they had a race from the Catalina Island to the mainland. Pardon? And it's never been held again. We had, I think, 9 balloons. Barbara Keith, who she was a lady, all right, but she was a tough one. She also did parachute jumping. She did motorcycle races, did everything. She had a balloon, and she entered the Catalina race. And she ran out of fuel, but everybody went high, and the winds were, you'd just parallel the coast. It sets at an angle, and everybody's headed for Mexico and San Diego. And let me tell you a little bit about farming now. You guys don't know this probably with your balloon flying, but if you started flying years and years ago with the Piper J3 Cub, you'd have learned it damn quick, because above here, the Coriolis effect, our winds right here in this area, when you get up about 800 or 900 feet above the ground in the morning, the wind will shift clockwise about 30 to 45 degrees. And this is a damn good thing to remember, but it doesn't work in the mountains where they have, mountains disturbing the atmosphere and all this stuff. But it does work in the prairie countries, and I figured it had to be happening over the ocean, but probably at a lower altitude. So I went up to 10,000 feet, and I stayed parallel, and it was raining like hell, and everybody was getting soaked. And I started descending, and I got down to 100 feet, down to 80 feet, and whammo, that thing turned left 45 degrees and hit me for Dana Point. Coriolis effect does, but the old sailing boats would, if they had another 100 feet on their mast, they could have used this too. But on the way in, everyone was supposed to have, we had a lot of famous people on. P.T. went on that, Cliff Robinson, he flew in the race, and there were some, Click never got off the island. He always has problems like that. But I did make it in, and I don't know, I was about 2/3 of the way in, and I right close to the water, and here comes a big Boston whaler. They were a big wide boat, and the guy hollered up, and he said, "You okay?" And I said, "Sure, I'm okay." And he said, "You got enough fuel to make it?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, I can go stay up here 2 or 3 more hours. I don't care." But I said, I'm looking ahead there underneath the clouds, and I see a big cliff. And I said, "Is there room between that cliff and for me to land in the ocean or sand beach?" And he says, "You bet." And there's a railroad there and everything. So, God, I hadn't made it that time. But these disappear, and I got this thing right down about 10 feet off the water, sliding in about 30 miles an hour, and God, right up in front of me, you've never seen a crowd of people like this, about 300 of them standing there in the water. What are you going to do? Bash into them and break somebody's buck? So finally I dumped it in the water, and I ruined all my clothes. Got the balloon wet and everything else. But, this is ballooning. The unexpected always happens. But you always seem to come out ahead. I don't know. Ballooning, sport ballooning is entirely different than what I do. I never have done this, and I never will. I don't know how to tell you some of these things, but I work for agencies in Washington and on an open contract, and when they have work for me, they put money in a pot and they assign the task, and when the task is finished, I go home. So my longest period doing this was over 2 years, and that was during the Vietnam War. I had, oh God, that kept me busy, I'll tell you. And I don't know, they keep coming, and there's more and more problems, and I keep solving more and more problems. We dumped, before the infiltration by balloons of behind the Iron Curtain. We'll talk about that. Becky has a sheet I gave her of a machine I developed. It carried 450 pounds of leaflets as a drop over behind the Iron Curtain, because Radio Free Europe, as they called it, but it wasn't free. Their money came someplace else. But you can't use a radio to deliver a message to behind the Iron Curtain, because as soon as you start your transmission, they jam it. So nobody can understand what the hell's going on. So, but leaflets are different, and you make them just like a newspaper, and we drop, oh God, thousands and thousands and thousands. Sometimes on a day we drop over a ton. But leaflets are different over there because they don't have garbage like you people throw it away here. everything piece of paper out there in the field is unique, and they'll pick it up and they read it and they pass it on to their neighbor, and it works. And we got the Hungarian Revolution started, and they stopped us on that program because they didn't back them up. Because you get a revolution started, you got to help them. But Eisenhower didn't give me anything. I said, Christ, dropped 45. But we dropped leaflets over Russia, long-range stuff. We took pictures of, Jim was in on all that. It was called Gopher Project at that time, but it had other names too. And the down cameras preceded the U-2 program with Francis Gary Powers, who got shot out of the sky with a Russian rocket, and he held in captivity for a while, and everybody said, no, he's not our man. He goes, oh. We don't lie, really, but I don't know. It's been a fun life, and it all worked out. And I think I'm going to tell you something. I don't know if I should. I think I better not. Well, I will. This is an organization in Washington that calls me a national treasure. I don't know what the hell that means, but that. Okay, what else do you want to know? Yeah. Well, we can go out and look at that one. That's pretty easy. Everything's homemade on that thing. But I come from a family that everybody makes every damn thing they want, and you don't buy it because we never had any money, And it's still the same. So. But the quick releases, when you come in, you have to unhook the downwind side so that the balloon will lay over and just tow you like a boat. And the top of the balloon, some of these things, they look so simple now, but in the beginning to deflate the balloon, we had a dynamite cap in a little aluminum tube, and we took the top of the balloon and had a big hole in it. We brought it all together, and we had a half-inch webbing stitched up there so it wouldn't slide out. And we put a line around that, and we fired that dynamite cap, and that little pellet would cut it off, and the top would open up. But how do you make it work? And the first thing they gave us was a goddamn flashlight. And if you bump the flashlight, the damn thing will go on and off and stuff like that. And if you bump that thing in the air and it goes off, you're dead. You brought the farm. So, I didn't figure that one out for a long time. In fact, it was almost a year and a half in the middle. I do my best work at night. There's no bother. About 2 o'clock, I wake up and I think of all my goddamn problems, and I thought, I got an idea. So on the way to work, I stop at Stitches in Sioux Falls. It's a bicycle shop, and I got a bicycle generator, and I take it up to the machine shop, and I put it in there, and I got a voltmeter, and I put on that thing, and you know what? Those things put out 27 volts alternating current, and they'll knock you on your fanny. So I said, run out two wires about 300 or 400 feet out there and put one of our squibs out there and pull the string, bang, worked perfect. So there's no electricity until you pull the string. God, that was a lifesaver. I call that puffer factor. But all these things are the same. The vent, and it's just hit and miss until you find out what you want. And I don't know. More questions? If you want to know more technical stuff, you get me a blackboard, and I'll keep you busy till midnight. So. And it's fun. You'll be surprised how much you don't know. Yeah, in all the books you see, it says kerosene. On that first one, it wasn't. I did. Well, God, I wish we had a blackboard. Anyway, I guess we'll do it without. But anyway, I tried in the beginning. I built a burner that had made out of a 4-inch hole steel pipe, and I left a flange at the top and flange at the bottom. Made a sleeve that went over that and welded it top and bottom. And boy, you know what? That was the nicest burner you ever saw. However, after 4 or 5 flights, all hell broke loose because you got 3,000 degrees temperature inside that barrel from the fire. And you got ambient air temperature on the outside. You get uneven expansion. All of a sudden, that damn weld left go. I had fire clear up to the top of the balloon. I turned it off and loaded it in. And, you know, this isn't a piece of plywood. You don't have much spring back there. You know? God, you know, I had a doctor in Sioux Falls. And he's probably dead now. I don't know. But every time I walk in, he said, God, what's the matter with you now? And he said, well, you've worn out 3 bodies already. And so then I said, well, we got to go to steel coil, same as we got. The first thing I did, I started with kerosene. And I had a thing set outside the plant out on the east side of town, the Ford building, McNeil building. And I had my boys sit out there in the winter and burn that damn thing for 12 hours straight with kerosene. It burned good. It was kind of red fire and stuff, but, you know, you can't trust anything. And I took it back in the shop, and I took a hacksaw, and I cut this damn thing in short sections and all through the pipe that had accumulated solid carbon. And it choked the thing up, and just about the end of your flight, you'd be no more fire. So then we went to stove gas. And stove gas is what we use later on. So that puts, and then also you go out to propane, and it all works. So these things all come the hard way, really, and you always wonder, why didn't we figure this out before? But you don't. The vent in the side, I think our first one was 7 feet long, and it seemed to pick up lift instead of reducing it, so I think we ended up on that escalation about 21 feet, something like that. So, anyway.
Ed's going to be around for questions afterwards, so everybody stay around and visit with Ed and ask him all the questions you want. But
We'll go out by the machine if you want to look at it.
yeah.
It's farmer engineering.